He stood motionless beneath the sterile airport lights, guarding the body of a fallen brother, until a security agent tried to send the flag-draped casket through a baggage scanner. What happened next turned a quiet soldier's stand into a national reckoning. Welcome to Dusk Tales. Let's uncover what really happened. The harsh, sterile lighting of Gate C-17 at Northwood International Airport seemed to drain the color from Sergeant Elijah Hayes's immaculate classy uniform. The deep army blue appeared almost black, the gold braid on his service cap less lustrous, the pristine white gloves somehow dingier under the unforgiving fluorescence. Beside him, resting on a discreet, black-draped gurney provided by the airline, was the flag-draped transfer case carrying the remains of Specialist David Miller, his friend, his brother-in-arms, his responsibility. Sergeant Hayes, a sentinel from the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard, stood at a dignified parade rest, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the bustling crowds and the distant tarmac. His posture was a study in disciplined grief, unyielding and resolute. He was 24 years old, but his eyes held the weariness of a man much older, a man who had stood countless silent vigils at the tomb of the unknown soldier, a man who now bore the sacred duty of escorting a fallen comrade on his final journey home to his waiting family. The ambient noise of the airport, the hurried footsteps, the rolling suitcases, the garbled announcements, seemed to fade into a dull roar around the small, somber island of his vigil. He was aware of the curious glances, the hushed whispers, the occasional respectful nod from older travelers who recognized the solemnity of his uniform and his charge. He acknowledged none of them, his focus entirely on the transfer case and the honor it represented. Then, a new sound intruded, sharp and officious. "All right, soldier, what's all this then? You're blocking a fire exit with this display." The voice belonged to a portly airport security supervisor, his name tag reading Agent Stark, his tone a mixture of impatience and suspicion. Stark gestured dismissively towards the flag-draped case. Sergeant Hayes shifted his gaze, slowly, deliberately, to meet Stark's eyes. "Sir, this is a dignified transfer of remains for United States Army Specialist David Miller. I am his official escort. We are awaiting clearance to board." His voice was low, steady, devoid of inflection, the voice of a tomb guard. Stark snorted, a sound of profound disrespect. "Dignified transfer, huh? Looks like a lot of fuss for a box. We got rules here, soldier. You can't just set up shop wherever you please. This case needs to go through the oversized baggage scanner. And you," he eyed Hayes's formal uniform with a disdainful smirk, "you'll need to go through a full pat-down. That getup you're wearing is probably full of metal." Several passengers in the boarding area paused, their attention drawn by Stark's loud, abrasive tone. An elderly woman clutched her chest, her eyes wide with disbelief. A young man in a business suit quickly averted his gaze, clearly uncomfortable. Sergeant Hayes remained outwardly impassive, though a cold knot of anger tightened in his stomach. He had faced down far greater threats than an arrogant airport official. His training, the endless hours of drilling, the solemn oath he had taken, all converged in this moment. "Sir," Hayes repeated, his voice still level, "this is a United States soldier returning home. He will be treated with full military honors. The transfer case will not be subjected to a baggage scanner. It remains under my personal escort at all times, in accordance with Department of Defense regulations and established protocol for the dignified transport of fallen service members. My credentials and orders are in order." He produced a sheaf of official documents from his breast pocket, offering them to Stark. Stark waved them away. "Regulations? Protocol? I got airport security regulations, pal. And they say that box goes through the scanner, and you get checked. Don't care if you're General Patton himself. No exceptions." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, insinuating whisper. "Unless, of course, you want to make this easier on yourself. A little expediting fee could probably clear up any misunderstandings about these protocols." The brazen suggestion of a bribe, layered on top of the profound disrespect, was almost too much for Hayes to bear. His hand instinctively tightened on the ceremonial sword at his side, a reflex born of years guarding hallowed ground. But he held his composure. This was not a battle to be fought with anger, but with unwavering adherence to duty and honor. Before Sergeant Hayes could respond, a younger, nervous-looking TSA agent, clearly Stark's subordinate, hurried over. Supervisor Stark, sir. The airline liaison is here. And there's a general on the phone for this sergeant. Stark's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, then narrowed. Who was this young soldier, and why was a general suddenly involved in what Stark considered a routine assertion of his petty authority? The quiet dignity of the tomb guard was about to collide with the entrenched arrogance of a petty tyrant, in full view of a stunned public. What happens when unbreakable duty meets unbending ignorance? Before we find out how this shocking confrontation unfolds, tell us in the comments. Have you ever witnessed a member of our armed forces being disrespected while in uniform? And if you believe that every fallen hero deserves our utmost respect on their final journey home, hit that like button and subscribe, because the response to this airport staff's harassment is about to become a national story, showcasing a depth of brotherhood and honor that will move you to your core. Sergeant Elijah Hayes was no stranger to sacrifice or the weight of solemn duty. His path to becoming a sentinel at the tomb of the unknown soldier had been one of relentless dedication and almost unimaginable self-discipline. Growing up in a tough neighborhood in South Chicago, the Army had been his way out, his path to a life of purpose. He'd excelled, his natural athleticism and keen intellect quickly marking him for advancement. But it was his unwavering integrity, his profound respect for tradition and honor, that had led him to volunteer for the arduous training program of the Old Guard. Fewer than 20% of applicants make it through. The physical demands were brutal. The mental fortitude required even more so. Hours upon hours of drilling, perfecting every minute detail of the 21-step walk, the precise handling of the M14 rifle, the unblinking vigil in blistering heat and freezing cold. It was a life lived in a state of perpetual reverence, a constant meditation on sacrifice. Specialist David Miller had been his bunkmate during advanced infantry training, a goofy, perpetually optimistic kid from a small town in Ohio who could always make Hayes laugh, even in the grimmest of circumstances. They'd forged a bond stronger than brotherhood, a connection common among those who face shared hardship and the shadow of mortality. When Miller deployed to Afghanistan and Hayes went to Fort Myer for tomb guard training, they'd stayed in touch, their letters and occasional calls a lifeline across continents and vastly different duties. Miller's last letter had been full of excitement about coming home, about introducing Hayes to his fiancée, about their plans to open a small garage together. Then came the notification. Killed in action. An IED. Instantaneous. Hayes had felt a piece of himself die with Miller. When a request came for an escort from the Old Guard to accompany Miller's remains home, Hayes had volunteered without hesitation. It was the last act of service he could perform for his friend, a sacred trust. He had flown to Dover Air Force Base, participated in the solemn, dignified transfer ceremony there, his heart aching as he watched Miller's flag-draped transfer case being carefully loaded onto the C-17. And now, here he was in this soulless airport terminal, facing a man like Stark, a man who embodied an ignorance so profound it bordered on malice. The journey to this gate had been long and emotionally fraught. Hayes hadn't slept in over 36 hours, a combination of grief, duty, and the logistical complexities of coordinating a multi-leg journey for a fallen soldier. He had personally overseen every transfer, every movement of the casket, ensuring that Specialist Miller was afforded every ounce of respect he had earned. He dealt with airline staff, cargo handlers, and various officials, most of whom had been professional and compassionate, understanding the gravity of his mission. But Stark was different. Stark represented something ugly, a casual cruelty that dismissed sacrifice and mocked solemnity. As the younger TSA agent, whose name tag read Chun, nervously informed Stark about the airline liaison and the phone call from a general, Stark's face hardened. He clearly didn't like his authority being questioned, especially not by a subordinate, and certainly not in front of an audience. A general? Stark scoffed, though his eyes flickered with a momentary unease. Probably some desk jockey trying to pull rank. Tell him I'm busy with a security situation. He turned back to Hayes, his demeanor even more aggressive. Look, soldier, I don't have time for your games. That box goes through the scanner, or it doesn't fly. Your choice. And you. He jabbed a thick finger towards Hayes's chest. You're coming with me for that pat-down. Now, several passengers gasped audibly. An older man in a VFW cap stood up, his face flushed with anger. Now see here, you tin-pot dictator, he began, but his wife pulled him back down, whispering urgently. Hayes held up a gloved hand, a subtle gesture for calm. He would handle this. He would not allow this situation to escalate into a public brawl, dishonoring Miller's memory. Supervisor Stark, Hayes said, his voice still preternaturally calm, though his eyes now held a glint of cold steel. Your refusal to acknowledge official Department of Defense protocols and your insistence on disrespecting the remains of a United States soldier constitute a serious breach of federal guidelines governing the transport of fallen military personnel. Furthermore, your attempt to solicit a bribe is a federal offense. I will, of course, be filing a full report. Stark's face turned a mottled red. The accusation of soliciting a bribe, made so calmly and publicly, clearly hit a nerve. You threatening me, boy? Stark snarled, his hand moving instinctively towards the taser on his belt. Because that'll get you a lot more than a missed flight. The tension was unbearable. The entire gate area had fallen silent, every eye fixed on the confrontation. Agent Shin looked terrified, caught between his aggressive supervisor and the implacable tomb guard. The airline liaison, a harried-looking woman in a company blazer, finally pushed her way forward. Supervisor Stark, please, she said, her voice trembling slightly. General Peterson is on the line from the Pentagon. He's a 3-star. He's demanding to speak with whoever is obstructing his soldiers' escort. Stark hesitated. A 3-star general from the Pentagon was not someone he could easily dismiss, even with his inflated sense of importance. But to back down now, in front of everyone, would be a crushing blow to his ego. He was trapped, and his frustration made him even more dangerous. He glared at Hayes, his eyes filled with venom. This isn't over, soldier boy, he hissed. Not by a long shot. What Stark didn't realize was that for Sergeant Elijah Hayes, it was never about winning a confrontation or asserting his own authority. It was about honor. It was about duty. It was about ensuring that David Miller, who had given his last full measure of devotion, received the respect he so profoundly deserved. And on that ground, Hayes would never yield. The standoff at Gate C-17 was rapidly escalating from a localized dispute into a full-blown incident. Supervisor Stark, caught between his own stubborn arrogance and the undeniable authority of a 3-star general on the line, was visibly flustered. He snatched the phone from the airline liaison, his face a mask of barely suppressed fury. Stark here, he barked into the receiver. The voice on the other end, though inaudible to the onlookers, was clearly not pleased. Stark's posture changed subtly as he listened, his bravado deflating like a punctured tire. His responses became clipped, deferential. Yes, General. No, General. I understand, General. Of course, General. After a few excruciating minutes, he handed the phone back, his face pale. He avoided looking at Sergeant Hayes, instead directing his ire at Agent Shun and the airline liaison. Well, don't just stand there. Get this transfer case cleared for boarding, and find the sergeant a private screening room. Immediately, his attempt to reassert authority was pathetic, his earlier bluster now ringing hollow. As Agent Shun and the airline staff hurried to comply, a new group of individuals began to approach Gate C-17. They moved with a quiet, purposeful dignity that set them apart from the usual airport hustle. There were about a dozen of them, men and women of varying ages, some in civilian clothes, others wearing caps or jackets adorned with military insignia. VFW, American Legion, unit patches from conflicts spanning decades. They had been scattered throughout the terminal, waiting for their own flights, But word of the confrontation, the disrespect shown to a fallen soldier and his tomb guard escort, had spread with the uncanny speed of the veteran grapevine. One by one, they had made their way to the gate, drawn by an unspoken call to solidarity. They didn't speak, didn't interfere with the airport staff who were now belatedly and with flustered efficiency preparing for the dignified transfer. Instead, they formed a silent, impromptu honor cordon, lining the path from where Specialist Miller's transfer case rested to the jet bridge. Their presence was a powerful, unspoken rebuke to Stark and a profound gesture of respect for Sergeant Hayes and his fallen comrade. Passengers awaiting their flights watched in hushed awe. The atmosphere at the gate had transformed. The earlier tension and ugliness were replaced by a palpable sense of solemnity and reverence. Even Stark, fuming silently in a corner, seemed to recognize that he had profoundly misjudged the situation, that he had poked a hornet's nest of deeply held conviction. Sergeant Hayes, who had maintained his stoic composure throughout the ordeal, felt a lump form in his throat as he saw the veterans assemble. These were strangers, yet in their eyes he saw a shared understanding, a common bond forged in service and sacrifice. Their silent tribute was more eloquent than any words of apology Stark could have offered. One of the veterans, an elderly man in a wheelchair, his chest adorned with a Purple Heart and a combat infantryman badge from the Korean War, struggled to rise as Hayes and the transfer case passed. Two younger veterans gently helped him to his feet. He rendered a slow, shaky salute, his eyes, though clouded with age, shining with fierce pride. Hayes paused, turned, and returned the salute with the crisp precision of a tomb guard, a silent acknowledgement of shared brotherhood, a profound moment of intergenerational respect. The airline captain, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair, emerged from the jet bridge. He approached Sergeant Hayes, his expression one of deep contrition. "Sergeant," he said, extending his hand, "I'm Captain Evans. I want to personally apologize for the unacceptable behavior of some of the ground staff. What you and Specialist Miller endured is inexcusable. Please be assured, this aircraft will not depart until Specialist Miller is aboard and treated with the full honors he deserves. My crew and I are humbled to be a part of his final journey home." Hayes shook the captain's hand. "Thank you, Captain. That means a great deal." As the transfer case was carefully moved towards the aircraft, escorted by Hayes and now flanked by the silent honor guard of veterans, something remarkable happened. Passengers in the gate area, witnessing the profound display of respect, began to stand. One by one, then in groups, then almost the entire gate area rose to their feet, many placing their hands over their hearts, their faces reflecting a mixture of sorrow, respect, and perhaps a touch of shame for the earlier indignity. The only person who remained seated, conspicuously, was Agent Stark, his face a mask of sullen resentment, his isolation complete. Agent Chun, who had been diligently assisting with the boarding protocols, caught Hayes's eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent apology for his supervisor's conduct and a gesture of solidarity. Hayes acknowledged it with a slight inclination of his head. He knew Chun was not to blame. The young agent had been caught in an impossible situation. The issue was not with individuals like Chun, but with systemic arrogance and the abuse of petty power embodied by men like Stark. This incident, Hayes realized, was about more than just one fallen soldier, one tomb guard, one belligerent airport official. It was a reflection of a larger societal disconnect, a forgetting of the sacrifices that underpin the freedoms so casually enjoyed and so easily disrespected. But it was also a powerful reminder of the enduring strength of the military community, their unwavering commitment to their own, and the deep well of respect that still existed within the heart of the American public, waiting only for a catalyst to bring it to the surface. The boarding of Specialist David Miller's remains onto the aircraft was conducted with the utmost dignity, a stark contrast to the earlier chaos and disrespect. Captain Evans himself supervised the careful loading of the transfer case into a specially designated area of the cargo hold, ensuring it was secured with reverence. Sergeant Hayes stood at attention on the tarmac beside the aircraft, his white-gloved hand rendering a slow, poignant salute until the cargo door was sealed. The impromptu honor guard of veterans remained on the jet bridge, their silent vigil a powerful testament. As Hayes prepared to board, Captain Evans approached him again. "Sergeant," he said, "we've arranged for you to be seated in first class. It's the least we can do. And please, allow my crew and me to express our deepest condolences for the loss of your friend and our profound gratitude for his service and yours." Hayes, though his orders dictated he maintain a low profile and avoid drawing attention to himself during transport, recognized the sincerity of the offer. "Thank you, Captain. Your respect, and that of your crew, honors Specialist Miller." Once aboard, seated in the quiet calm of the first-class cabin, the adrenaline that had sustained Hayes through the confrontation began to ebb, leaving him with a profound weariness. He closed his eyes, the image of David Miller's laughing face, his irrepressible optimism, vivid in his mind. The grief, held at bay by the demands of duty and the need for stoic composure, threatened to overwhelm him. He thought of Miller's parents, waiting in Ohio, their hearts broken, their lives forever changed. He thought of Miller's fiancée, her dreams shattered. His role as escort was not just a logistical one. It was a sacred trust, a promise to bring their boy, their love, their hero, home with the honor he deserved. The incident with Stark, as ugly as it had been, had, in a strange way, reaffirmed the importance of that trust. It had shown him that while ignorance and arrogance exist, so too does a deep wellspring of respect and gratitude. The actions of the veterans, the spontaneous reverence of the passengers, the quiet integrity of Captain Evans and Agent Shun, these were the true reflections of the nation Miller had served. The flight was uneventful. Hayes barely registered the solicitous attention of the flight attendants, the comfortable seat, the quiet murmur of the engines. His thoughts were consumed by David, by the memories they had shared, by the future David would never have. He clutched the small, velvet-lined case that held Miller's Purple Heart and Bronze Star, medals that would be presented to his parents. These small pieces of metal, symbols of courage and sacrifice, felt impossibly heavy in his hand. Upon arrival at Columbus International Airport in Ohio, Hayes was met by a contingent from the local Army garrison, as well as representatives from the Miller family's Casualty Assistance Office. The transfer of remains from the aircraft to the waiting hearse was conducted with flawless military precision, a solemn, dignified procession across the tarmac. As Hayes stood saluting his friend for the last time on that leg of the journey, he noticed a figure standing a little apart from the official welcoming party. It was the elderly Korean War veteran from the Northwood Airport, the one who had struggled to rise from his wheelchair to salute. He was there, in Columbus, his old VFW cap clutched in his hand, his eyes moist. How had he gotten there? Had he changed his flight? Hayes was deeply moved. This old soldier, a stranger, had felt compelled to continue his vigil, to ensure that Specialist Miller was honored every step of the way. It was a testament to the unbreakable bonds of service, a brotherhood that transcended age, rank, and circumstance. Later, after Specialist Miller had been received by his heartbroken but grateful family at the funeral home, Hayes finally had a moment to himself in his sterile hotel room. He meticulously prepared his uniform for the funeral service the next day, his movements automatic, ingrained by years of repetition. As he polished his brass and shined his shoes, his mind replayed the events at Northwood International. He knew he had a duty to report Supervisor Stark's conduct. Such behavior could not be allowed to stand, not when it dishonored the fallen and undermined the very principles they had fought to protect. He would file a formal complaint, detailed and precise, outlining every infraction, every insult. He owed it to David. He owed it to all the Davids yet to come. But as he worked, he also thought of Captain Evans, of Agent Shun, of the nameless veterans who had formed that spontaneous honor guard, of the passengers who had stood in silent respect, of the old Korean War vet who had traveled hundreds of miles to pay his final respects. Their actions, their quiet courage and compassion, were a powerful counter-narrative to Stark's ugliness. They were a reminder that for every act of ignorance, there could be a chorus of respect for every moment of dishonor, an opportunity for profound dignity. The journey was not yet over. The funeral, the final farewell, still lay ahead. But Sergeant Elijah Hayes felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was not just an escort. He was a guardian of honor, a sentinel ensuring that the sacrifices of men like Specialist David Miller would never be forgotten or disrespected as long as he drew breath. The funeral of Specialist David Miller was a poignant and dignified affair, a testament to a young life lived with courage and cut tragically short. The small Ohio town turned out in force, lining the streets as the hearse, escorted by local law enforcement and a motorcycle honor guard from a nearby veterans group, made its way to the community church. American flags fluttered from porches and lampposts, a silent tribute to a fallen son. Sergeant Elijah Hayes, his uniform immaculate, his bearing a perfect blend of military precision and profound sorrow, stood with the Miller family throughout the service. He presented them with the flag from David's casket, his voice steady but thick with emotion as he recited the traditional words of committal. He handed Mrs. Miller her son's Purple Heart and Bronze Star, tokens of a bravery she had always known resided in her boy. The grief in the church was palpable, a heavy shroud of loss. But there was also an immense pride, a deep gratitude for David's service, and for the manner in which Sergeant Hayes had brought him home, guarding his honor every step of the way. The old Korean War veteran was there too, seated quietly in a back pew, his presence a silent link in the long chain of American sacrifice. After the interment at the local cemetery, where a firing party delivered a final, sharp salute and a lone bugler played a heartbreakingly beautiful rendition of taps, the Miller family held a small reception at their home. They insisted Sergeant Hayes attend, treating him not as an official escort, but as an honored guest, a cherished friend of their son. Mr. Miller, his eyes red-rimmed but his voice firm, clasped Hayes' shoulder. "Sergeant," he said, "I don't have the words to thank you. Knowing you were with David, that you brought him home to us with such dignity, it means more than you can ever know. You are a true credit to your uniform, to your country." Hayes, humbled, could only nod. "It was my honor, sir. Specialist Miller was my brother." Later that evening, back in his hotel room, Hayes meticulously drafted his formal complaint against TSA Supervisor Stark. He detailed every aspect of the encounter at Northwood International Airport, citing the specific regulations Stark had violated, the disrespect shown to the remains of Specialist Miller, and Stark's attempted solicitation of a bribe. He included the names of witnesses, including Captain Evans and Agent Sean, and attached copies of his official orders and the Department of Defense directives governing dignified transfers. He sent the report through official channels to his commanding officer at the Old Guard, and also, on the advice of Captain Evans, to the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General's office and several congressional oversight committees. He knew it was a long shot. Bureaucracies were notoriously slow, and men like Stark often had ways of deflecting accountability. But he had to try. He owed it to David. Weeks turned into months. Hayes returned to his duties at the tomb of the unknown soldier, his silent vigils taking on an even deeper personal meaning. He often thought of David Miller, of his easy laugh, his unwavering optimism. He carried the memory of the Miller family's gratitude and the quiet dignity of the veterans at the airport as a bulwark against the cynicism that could so easily creep in. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, he was summoned to his commanding officer's office. Colonel Williams, a man Hayes deeply respected, looked up from a letter on his desk, a rare smile on his face. "Sergeant Hayes," Colonel Williams began, "I have some news regarding your complaint about the incident at Northwood International." Hayes's heart quickened. "Sir, it seems your report, along with supporting testimony from several credible witnesses, including an airline captain and another TSA agent, caused quite a stir. The Inspector General's office launched a full investigation into Supervisor Stark's conduct, and, it appears, into the broader operational culture at Northwood TSA." The colonel paused, then continued. "As of this morning, Mr. Stark is no longer employed by the Transportation Security Administration. He was given the option to resign or face termination and potential federal charges for soliciting a bribe and official misconduct. He chose to resign. A wave of quiet satisfaction washed over Hayes. Justice, it seemed, had been served. Furthermore, Colonel Williams added, the TSA has issued a new national directive reinforcing training and protocol for all personnel regarding the handling of dignified transfers of military remains. Your detailed report was cited as a key factor in prompting this review and update. They're even incorporating elements of your experience into their training modules as an example of what not to do and how respectfully such situations should be handled. Hayes was stunned. He had hoped for some measure of accountability for Stark, but he had never imagined his actions would lead to such a widespread, systemic change. And one more thing, Sergeant, the colonel said, his smile widening. Remember that group of veterans who formed the honor cordon at the gate? And that elderly gentleman who followed you to Ohio? Hayes nodded. They, along with Captain Evans and Agent Shun, have been formally commended by the Secretary of Homeland Security for their actions. And the TSA is establishing a new Honor Guard liaison program at major airports, staffed by veteran volunteers, to assist with and ensure the respectful facilitation of all military dignified transfers. Specialist David Miller's final journey home, though marred by one man's ignorance, had ultimately become a catalyst for profound, positive change, ensuring that other fallen heroes and their escorts would be treated with the unwavering honor and dignity they deserved. Sergeant Hayes allowed himself a small, rare smile. David would have liked that. He would have laughed his goofy laugh and said, "Well, Eli, it looks like we stirred things up again, didn't we?" And Hayes would have known that his friend's sacrifice and his own steadfast adherence to duty had indeed made a difference, a lasting difference, in a world that too often forgot the true meaning of honor. The news of Supervisor Stark's resignation and the sweeping changes within the TSA was not just a personal vindication for Sergeant Hayes. It became a story that resonated deeply within the military and veteran communities. It was shared across social media, discussed in VFW halls, and even highlighted in several national news outlets as a rare instance of swift accountability and positive systemic reform stemming from a single incident of egregious disrespect. For Hayes, life returned to the demanding, solemn rhythm of a tomb guard. The 21 steps, the 21-second pause, the meticulous adherence to tradition. These rituals were his anchor, his way of honoring not just the unknowns, but all who had served and sacrificed, including his friend, David Miller. Yet, something had shifted within him. The incident at Northwood and its unexpected aftermath had shown him that his duty extended beyond the pristine marble of the tomb. It extended to upholding the honor of the uniform and the dignity of the fallen, wherever they might be. He became an informal advisor within the Old Guard on matters related to dignified transfers, his first-hand experience and the subsequent policy changes making him an invaluable resource. He helped refine training protocols for escorts, ensuring they were not only prepared for the emotional weight of their duty, but also for navigating potential logistical and interpersonal challenges with unyielding professionalism. Agent Shun, the young TSA agent who had shown quiet courage at Northwood, was promoted. He later reached out to Sergeant Hayes, expressing his gratitude. "Your actions that day, Sergeant, they gave me the courage to speak up about other issues I was seeing. Things are changing here, slowly, but they're changing for the better." Stark's departure sent a clear message. Captain Evans, the airline pilot, made it a point to personally greet military escorts on his flights, ensuring his crew understood the profound importance of their solemn journey. He often shared the story of Sergeant Hayes and Specialist Miller, carefully omitting names to protect privacy, but emphasizing the lessons learned during pre-flight briefings when a dignified transfer was on board. The elderly Korean War veteran, whose name Hayes later learned was Mr. Arthur Pennington, became a minor celebrity within his local veterans community after his quiet pilgrimage to honor Specialist Miller was reported. He used his newfound platform to advocate for better support services for Gold Star families and for increased awareness of the protocols surrounding military honors. His actions inspired other veterans to become more active in ensuring their fallen comrades were always treated with respect. Even the airport itself, Northwood International, underwent a significant cultural shift. The management, deeply embarrassed by the incident, implemented mandatory sensitivity and protocol training for all staff, particularly those in security and customer-facing roles. They installed a small, discreet memorial plaque near Gate C-17, not mentioning the specifics of the incident, but honoring all fallen service members who passed through their gates on their final journey home. It was a quiet acknowledgement of their past failing and a commitment to future respect. One crisp spring morning, nearly a year after that fateful day, Sergeant Hayes was once again at an airport, this time escorting another fallen soldier, a young woman from his own unit who had died in a tragic training accident. As he stood by her transfer case in the solemn moments before boarding, he noticed a new presence. Two older gentlemen in blazers with veteran airport liaison embroidered on them. They approached him respectfully. "Sergeant Hayes," one said, extending his hand. "We're part of the new Honor Guard liaison program. We're here to ensure everything proceeds smoothly and with the dignity your comrade deserves. Is there anything at all you need?" Hayes looked at them, a profound sense of gratitude welling up. This was David Miller's legacy. This was the ripple effect of standing firm for what was right. "No, gentlemen," Hayes replied, his voice steady. "Thank you. Everything is in order. It seems the system is working." He knew that vigilance would always be required, that ignorance and disrespect could surface at any time. But today, in this airport, at this gate, honor was prevailing. As he escorted the young soldier onto the aircraft, he glanced back at the two veteran liaisons, who rendered a slow, respectful salute. He returned it, a silent acknowledgement of their shared purpose. The journey home for this fallen hero would be one of unwavering dignity, a standard now firmly and visibly upheld. The memory of Specialist David Miller and the quiet, unyielding courage of his friend and escort, Sergeant Elijah Hayes, had not just ensured one soldier's honorable return, but had fortified the very systems designed to protect that honor for all who would follow. The echoes of that confrontation at Gate C-17 had indeed moved a nation, not with noise and fury, but with the quiet, powerful resonance of duty, respect, and an unbreakable brotherhood. The implementation of the Honor Guard liaison program at major airports across the country became one of the most visible and impactful outcomes of the Northwood incident. Staffed by trained veteran volunteers, these liaisons acted as advocates and facilitators for military escorts and Gold Star families, ensuring that the dignified transfer process was handled with the utmost respect and efficiency, smoothing over potential bureaucratic hurdles and providing a comforting, knowledgeable presence during an incredibly difficult time. Sergeant Hayes, though he remained an active duty tomb guard, was occasionally asked to consult on the training materials for these liaisons, sharing his insights and experiences. His quiet authority and unwavering commitment to his fallen comrades made him a deeply respected voice in these discussions. He never sought public recognition, always deflecting praise and emphasizing that his actions were simply what any soldier would, or should, do in such circumstances. The story of his stand at Northwood, however, continued to circulate within military and veteran circles, becoming an informal case study in leadership, moral courage, and the importance of upholding the dignity of the fallen. It was often told to new recruits in the Old Guard as an example of the profound responsibilities they would carry, not just at the tomb, but in every aspect of their service. Supervisor Stark faded into obscurity, his name becoming a cautionary tale within the TSA of how arrogance and abuse of power could lead to a swift and ignominious downfall. The changes he inadvertently triggered within the agency were a testament to the fact that even deeply entrenched negative cultures could be reformed when confronted with irrefutable evidence of wrongdoing and strong, principled leadership from both within and outside the organization. The Miller family, though their grief for David remained a constant ache, found some measure of solace in the knowledge that his final journey and the disrespect he initially faced had become a catalyst for such positive and widespread change. They established a small foundation in David's name, dedicated to supporting Gold Star families and promoting education about the sacrifices of military personnel. Sergeant Hayes served as an honorary board member, his presence a quiet symbol of the Foundation's mission. Years later, when Sergeant Hayes himself was approaching retirement from active duty, he attended a national conference on veteran affairs. During a panel discussion on honoring the fallen, a senior TSA official spoke at length about the agency's commitment to dignified transfers, highlighting the success of the Honor Guard Liaison Program and the comprehensive training now in place for all personnel. The official recounted, without naming names, the critical incident some years prior that had served as the impetus for these reforms, describing how the courage of a young escort and the solidarity of the veteran community had forced the agency to confront its failings and implement lasting change. After the presentation, Hayes approached the official. "That was an excellent presentation, ma'am," he said quietly. "The changes you've described, they've made a real difference." The official, a Deputy Administrator Hayes had never met, looked at him, then at his name tag. A flicker of recognition, then profound respect, dawned in her eyes. "Sergeant Hayes?" she asked, her voice hushed. It was you, wasn't it? At Northwood?" Hayes simply nodded. "I was just doing my duty, ma'am, escorting my friend home." The Deputy Administrator was silent for a moment, visibly moved. "Sergeant," she said finally, "what you call just doing your duty set a standard for an entire agency. It reminded us all of what true honor looks like. On behalf of the Transportation Security Administration, and personally, thank you. You changed us for the better." Hayes accepted her thanks with his customary humility. He had never sought accolades, only to fulfill his solemn responsibilities with the dignity and respect they demanded. As he walked away, he reflected on the long, strange journey that had begun at Gate C-17. It was a testament to the enduring power of quiet courage, the unbreakable bonds of brotherhood, and the profound truth that one person, standing firm for what is right, can indeed move mountains, or at the very least, an entire federal agency. The legacy of Specialist David Miller and the steadfast honor of his Tomb Guard escort echoed not in grand monuments, but in the quiet, respectful efficiency of every dignified transfer that now passed through America's airports, a lasting tribute to a friendship forged in service and a duty fulfilled against the odds. The silence of the tomb, where Sergeant Hayes had stood so many vigils, had found its voice in the corridors of power and policy, ensuring that the fallen would always be welcomed home with the honor they so richly deserved. The impact of the Northwood incident and the subsequent reforms continued to resonate for years, shaping not only TSA protocols, but also influencing how other governmental and even private organizations approached interactions with military personnel and veterans. The story of Sergeant Hayes became a quiet legend, a touchstone for discussions about respect, duty, and the often unseen challenges faced by those in uniform, even on home soil. Hayes himself, after retiring from his distinguished career in the Old Guard, chose a path that surprised many but seemed perfectly in keeping with his character. He didn't seek a lucrative security consultancy or a high-profile position. Instead, he returned to his old neighborhood in South Chicago and dedicated himself to mentoring at-risk youth, using his experiences and the discipline he had learned in the Army to guide young men and women towards lives of purpose and integrity. He rarely spoke of his own heroism or of the incident at Northwood, unless a specific lesson could be drawn from it to help a young person navigate a difficult situation. He taught them about quiet strength, about the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it's unpopular, about the dignity inherent in every individual. He showed them that true toughness wasn't about bluster or aggression, but about resilience, self-discipline, and unwavering moral character. Occasionally, he would receive updates from Agent Chun, who had risen through the ranks of the TSA, becoming a respected leader in their training and standards division. Chin always credited Sergeant Hayes as his inspiration, the man whose quiet courage had shown him what was possible. Captain Evans, the airline pilot, often invited Hayes to speak to new pilot classes about the importance of recognizing and honoring military personnel, particularly those on solemn escort duty. The story of Gate C-17 became a fixture in their professional development. Mr. Arthur Pennington, the Korean War veteran, passed away peacefully a few years after the Northwood incident, but his legacy lived on. The local VFW post, he belonged to, established an annual Pennington Honor Flight in his memory, sponsoring trips for elderly or infirm veterans to visit war memorials in Washington, D.C., ensuring that their sacrifices, like a spontaneous act of solidarity for Specialist Miller, were never forgotten. The Honor Guard Liaison program continued to thrive, expanding to more airports each year, its ranks filled with dedicated veteran volunteers who saw their service as a direct continuation of their oath to support and defend. They became an indispensable part of the dignified transfer process, a comforting and reassuring presence for grieving families and solemn escorts alike. Sergeant Hayes never sought public acknowledgement for the changes he had helped bring about. His reward was in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that his friend, David Miller, had not died in vain, and that his final journey, though initially marred by disrespect, had ultimately served a greater purpose. It had sparked a conversation, initiated reforms, and reminded a nation of its sacred obligation to honor those who give their all. On Memorial Day, years into his retirement, Hayes would often visit Arlington National Cemetery, not as a former tomb guard, but as a simple citizen paying his respects. He would walk among the endless rows of white headstones, each one representing a life, a story, a sacrifice. He would pause at the tomb of the unknown soldier, his heart still swelling with the profound emotions that place always evoked. And sometimes, as he stood there, he would think of Specialist David Miller, of Gate C-17, of the unexpected confluence of ignorance and honor that had unfolded that day. He would remember the faces of the veterans who had stood with him, the quiet strength of Captain Evans, the nervous courage of Agent Shun. And he would understand, more deeply than ever, that the defense of honor is not a solitary endeavor, but a collective responsibility, a sacred trust passed down through generations of those who serve. The silence surrounding the tomb is not empty. It is filled with the unspoken promise that as long as there are those willing to stand guard, to remember, and to act with courage and integrity, the sacrifices of the fallen will never be truly in vain. Sergeant Elijah Hayes had been one such guardian, not just of a physical tomb, but of the enduring ideals it represented. And in his quiet, steadfast way, he had ensured that those ideals continued to shine brightly, a beacon of honor in a sometimes forgetful world. The legacy of Sergeant Elijah Hayes and Specialist David Miller, though rooted in a single, distressing incident, blossomed into a far-reaching narrative about the enduring power of respect and the ripple effects of principled action. The reforms within the TSA became a model, studied by other federal agencies and even some international bodies, on how to embed a culture of reverence and efficiency in sensitive procedures involving national heroes or significant cultural protocols. The training modules that incorporated the lessons from Northwood emphasized not just adherence to rules, but the critical importance of empathy, situational awareness, and the understanding that behind every uniform, every flag-draped casket, lies a profound human story of service and sacrifice. For Sergeant Hayes, retirement did not mean disengagement. He became a quiet force in his community, his mentorship program for youth producing remarkable results. Young men and women who might have otherwise succumbed to the allure of street gangs or the despair of limited opportunities found new paths, inspired by his example of discipline, integrity, and quiet strength. He taught them that honor wasn't about aggression or dominance, but about self-respect and respect for others, about fulfilling one's responsibilities with unwavering commitment. He rarely mentioned his own military accolades, but the young people he mentored knew he was a man of substance, a man who had walked through fire and emerged with his principles intact. The annual Pennington Honor Flight grew in scope and recognition, becoming a significant charitable endeavor that not only honored elderly veterans, but also educated younger generations about their sacrifices. Volunteers, many of them inspired by the original story of Mr. Pennington's journey to stand with Specialist Miller, dedicated countless hours to making these trips a reality, forging new intergenerational bonds in the process. The small plaque at Northwood International Airport near Gate C-17, initially a discreet acknowledgement, was eventually expanded into a more prominent memorial, with a brief, anonymized account of the incident and the positive changes it spurred. It became a point of reflection for travelers, a quiet reminder of the importance of treating all individuals, especially those in positions of solemn duty, with dignity and respect. The airline industry, too, took note. Several major carriers reviewed and enhanced their own internal protocols for military funeral escorts and dignified transfers, often consulting with veterans groups and programs like the Honor Guard liaisons to ensure their procedures were both respectful and efficient. Captain Evans became a vocal advocate within his airline for these improvements. Agent Shun, in his leadership role at the TSA, often used the Northwood incident as a teaching tool, not to shame or assign blame, but to illustrate how quickly a situation can deteriorate due to arrogance and lack of understanding, and conversely, how principled action can lead to profound positive change. He emphasized that every TSA officer, regardless of rank, had a responsibility to uphold the agency's core values, which included integrity and respect. The story of Sergeant Hayes and Supervisor Stark became an enduring, if informal, part of institutional memory, a reminder that systems are only as good as the people within them, and that accountability, when justly applied, can be a powerful force for reform. For the Miller family, while the pain of David's loss never truly faded, the knowledge that his memory had become intertwined with such significant and positive changes brought a measure of comfort. They remained in touch with Sergeant Hayes, their bond a testament to the shared journey of grief and remembrance. They knew that David's life and his death had mattered, not just to them, but to countless others who would benefit from the increased awareness and respect his story had engendered. Sergeant Hayes, in his quiet Chicago neighborhood, continued his work, instilling in a new generation the values he had lived by. He understood that the fight for honor and dignity was a continuous one, requiring constant vigilance and unwavering commitment. He had faced it down in a distant land, at the tomb of the unknowns, and in the sterile confines of an airport terminal. And in each instance, his response had been the same: steadfast adherence to duty, unwavering respect for the fallen, and a quiet courage that spoke louder than any shout. His legacy, like that of Specialist David Miller, was not etched in stone monuments, but woven into the fabric of changed institutions, enlightened policies, and the hearts of those whose lives they had touched. It was a legacy of honor, defended and upheld, ensuring that the echoes of Gate C-17 would continue to inspire respect for generations to come.